remembered it. Okay. Yeah, sorry about this late beginning. We seems like there was a blackout. So anyway, we're starting now. So we're holding on Tessamid base. We finished page 9a. We're on 9b now, and the Gemara that we learned yesterday was basically this Gemara about needing to be lishma. If you need to have in mind for the mitzvah of sukkah when you build a sukkah, as is the sukkah need to be built for the purpose of the mitzvah. And the Gemara brought proofs: Beis Shammai's opinion, Beis Hillel's opinion, and why does Beis Hillel hold his way, and why does Beis Shammai hold his way? And initially, the Gemara had a proof because it says Chag HaSukkah is Shivas Yamim LaHashem, and the Gemara understood that it at least the way Rashi learned was it says LaHashem, which meant it has to be for Hashem, and the Gemara says, but Beis Hillel uses that to tell you that the Atzei Sukkah are usher called Shiva. They're usher. You can't benefit from the wood of the sukkah all 7 days, and also because of the same pasuk, it says Chag HaSukkah Shivas Yamim LaHashem, and the Bryce of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira that that's called like a chagiga, just like so it's a asur bahana. You can't benefit from the sukkah. So this the Gemara said what so that's what the pasuk is used for. So we don't have a pasuk, of course, to tell us that you need to do it lishma, that it has to be for Hashem. And then the Gemara says, well, what does Beis Shammai do about this law? How does he know the law about not benefiting from the sukkah? And the Gemara answered that you're right. He obviously learns the same thing as Beis Hillel and as Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, and therefore the Gemara said it must be a different pasuk. And the pasuk that Beis Shammai is learning really from is a little different. The pasuk it's Chag HaSukkah Taseh Lecha, and that you have to make the sukkah for the Chag. And Sukkah Hasuy L'Shem Chag Be'inan. It has to be made L'Shem Chag. And what was the? How did we learn it? So it says Chag HaSukkah Taseh. So we translated it as Sukkah Taseh L'Chag. Chag HaSukkah Taseh L'Chag. Make your sukkah for the Chag, and it has to be for the holiday. And Beis Hillel holds that it's that it teaches you a special law that you could make a sukkah on Chol HaMoed. A sukkah doesn't have to exist for 7 days. Your sukkah could be built on Chol HaMoed, and it's not a problem. Beis Shammai doesn't agree with that. He holds you can't make a sukkah on Chol HaMoed, but we hold that. But Beis Hillel says you could make it on Chol HaMoed. You learn it from that pasuk that it's even during the Chag you could make the sukkah. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean on Yom Tov because you can't build on Yom Tov. So it must mean that you could make the sukkah on Chol HaMoed. So you can make the sukkah during Chol HaMoed, and then that's okay. And of course, we'll learn more about this on in the Gemara later. On it's discussed at more length over there in a further on in the tractate. Then the Gemara got into this question of what about tzitzis, and the Gemara basically proved that tzitzis needs to be lishma. You have to make tzitzis for the purpose of the mitzvah. So the Gemara says, so we should also need a sukkah to be made lishma. The Gemara answered, no, there is a special law that tzitzis has to be made for the mitzvah. And gedilam taseh lecha, it's l'shem chayvcha, that's for you, for your obligation. So we have extra pasuk. The pasuk tells you that, and the Gemara says, yeah, okay, so that would be sukkah, that would be tzitzis, has to be lishma, and that's why only tzitzis, but sukkah wouldn't need to be. The Gemara says, what do you mean? Sukkah also, it has the same words. Chag HaSukkah Taseh Lecha. It uses the same words. The Gemara says, no, that's talking about not that it can't be stolen. It has to be yours. It can't be stolen. And the Gemara said, What about tzitzis? Tzitzis may be also used that you can't be stolen. I answered that no, tzitzis. There's a pasuk that says tzitzis can't be stolen. A different pasuk. So therefore, that pasuk teaches you that tzitzis has to be made for the purpose of the mitzvah. But sukkah, the same wording that it uses by tzitzis, it uses by sukkah, but that is meant to teach you that it can't be stolen. And yesterday, of course, we talked about Tosfos a little. That Tosfos mentions that there's also a prohibition of having a mitzvah haba ba'avera. So what is the Gemara? What do we need to learn from a pasuk that you can't have a stolen sukkah? It's a mitzvah haba ba'avera. It's a mitzvah that you're doing while sinning. So obviously you can't have a stolen sukkah. Why do you need a pasuk for that? You're not allowed to do a mitzvah. It's like doing Hashem's will, but you're not doing Hashem's will because Hashem doesn't want you to steal. But you're stealing and doing a mitzvah. That's not a mitzvah. Mitzvah b'avera. It's mitzvah that's coming through an avera. So that's not Hashem's will. And so obviously that's not going to be kosher. So Tosfos answers a very revolutionary answer that he says mitzvah b'avera is a rabbinic law. Our Gemara tells us that by sukkah it actually is not kosher. It's not valid biblically. That if you steal a sukkah, it won't be valid biblically. Now, yesterday Jeffrey came up with a question, which is a very valid question about how does it work that you stole a sukkah? Because when you first of all, we know there's certain laws about a sukkah, about doing mitzvahs with other people's property, that people generally like that. And so why would it be that you're, why would it be that you, number one, why is it called stealing? And number two, seemingly, what is the case of stealing a sukkah? Like, what's the, how does it work to steal a sukkah? Is there certain rules about it? Like, is it, how do you fall into that category of stealing a sukkah? I'm just going to switch over to my computer now. 1 second. Okay. You can all hear me? Okay. Yeah, I guess Ben has something to say before I can continue. So yeah, Ben, what would
I wanted to ask, what about if you borrow a sukkah? Like if your friend is going out of town at that time and you don't have a sukkah, can you borrow a sukkah and build it for yourself? And then return it after sukkah.
Now you're talking about with permission or without permission?
Yeah, with permission, asking, yeah.
So the understanding is that a sukkah she'ula, a borrowed sukkah, is kosher. A lulav doesn't work that way. Lulav in Esra, you need to get a matana. You need it to be a gift, a lulav. But a sukkah you could borrow.
All right, thank you.
It's interesting because the Alter Rebbe says some very strange words when he talks about the law of a borrowed sukkah, and he says that a sukkah that you borrowed, the reason why it's kosher is because it's borrowed is considered like it's yours. Like it's not that borrowed is kosher. It's that let me pull it up over here. It's chapter 637. He says
it's given to you.
Even though the Torah says you should make from yourself a sukkah, in other words, from yours, should be yours. Nevertheless, you could fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah with a borrowed sukkah, because since you're entering it with permission, it's like it's yours. And when it says it should be yours, it's excluding a stolen one. But in other words, when you're borrowing it, that's considered like it's yours. Why did you have to add that? Borrowed is kosher, right? Borrowed is good enough. Why? It's considered like it's mine. I don't know if it's considered like it's mine. I didn't steal it, but
temporarily it's yours.
Mine? I don't know if I would call it mine.
I'm borrowing. Who cares if it's considered mine or not? As long as it's not stolen, it's kosher. But the Alter Rebbe, no, he has to add that since you're entering it with rishut, it's kishaloi. It's like it's yours. Very interesting. I know there's a sicha, there's an essay from the Rebbe about this, a discussion about this halacha, because it seems a little surprising. In other words, there is a different opinion that holds sukkah needs to be yours. We don't hold that way. And so the Alter Rebbe, it sort of like sounds like he's holding like this other view, which is not the accepted view. Okay, so getting back to my question of and really Jeffrey's discussion yesterday, that how does this work with regard to entering a sukkah that's not yours? Would you be allowed to do that? Because would that be considered, normally there's a law that people like when mitzvahs are done with their property. So for example, if your tefillin is in shul and someone needs a pair of tefillin, there's halachas about them being able to use your tefillin, of course not taking it out of shul, but right there in shul to use it, because a person, even though they didn't officially give you permission, but it's like they gave you permission because a person wants a mitzvah to be done with their property. So the question would be, how would that work with regard to sukkah? And what is our Gemara's case where you're stealing a sukkah, and the case would be that you would not be yotze, this type of a certain type of stealing a sukkah where you're not fulfilling the obligation. So in this chapter 637 in the Shulchan Aruch, so it talks about it and mentions that there are a number of cases where when you steal, it is kosher, or when you steal the sukkah. For example, if you kick someone out of their sukkah and you go and sit in it, you actually fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah. Why? Because you can't steal property. Landed property can't be stolen. And it basically ends up being that it's not that you can't call that a stolen sukkah. This is not a case of stolen because it's landed property, and because it's attached to the ground, it's not the sukkah is considered, it's not really stolen. It's considered similar to borrowing it. Now, you fulfilled your obligation. Later on, the Alter Rebbe mentions that you can't say a bracha on such a sukkah, because you can't say a bracha on something you stole. But to fill the mitzvah of sukkah, this is not the case of our Gemara where it says a stolen sukkah, you're not yotze. In other words, our Gemara says that l'mu'ute gezula, that it excludes a stolen sukkah, the chaga sukkah is tasa l'cha, that it excludes if it's stolen, l'mu'ute gezula. So what would that be excluding? It must be a different type of case. So one of the cases would be if you stole the schach, and if you stole the schach, you put it on top of your sukkah, so the law would be that if you don't want to give the money for the schach, that's considered that you're not fulfilling the mitzvah of sukkah, because this is considered stolen. In other words, as long as you'd be willing to give the money back for what you stole, then it would be a kosher sukkah. And that has to do with a rabbinic decree that because you don't have to because you don't have to return the actual wood that you're using, the branches, you don't have an obligation to return because of rabbinic law, that they didn't obligate you to return the actual branches that you're using for schach. All you need to do is return money. If you refuse, if you are not willing to return, to give money back for the schach, so now that would be considered a stolen sukkah. So if the schach is stolen into your property, you took it into your property, and that would be a case where it's a stolen sukkah. Another case would be you stole a sukkah that's on top of a wagon. So you took the whole wagon, you took the whole boat. And so that is considered a movable sukkah. And in that case, it's you stole it, and you would not fulfill your obligation. So that would be another example of stealing, where you stole it, and it's not considered borrowed, and you would not fulfill your obligation. And even if you're willing to give money for what you stole, it doesn't help, because that whole exemption of being willing to give money, it only works if you Ella imkain tarach Allah mitzvah. That only works if you built it that way. But here you just stole it. You didn't work on building it, and here you would just be allowed to return it. You wouldn't be allowed to pay for it. So this case would be a case where you stole and you would not fulfill the mitzvah. You would not fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah, because you're not allowed to have a stolen sukkah. And another example would be what would another example be?
Maybe if somebody had 4 walls in their sukkah, but you only had 2, and you needed a board, and you took the board and made his 4th wall or whatever. So the question is, now you have a kosher sukkah for building, but you didn't have the materials enough, and he still has a kosher sukkah.
So the thing is, if you would steal a board for your sukkah, and then if you're willing to give it, to pay for it, then it wouldn't be, then it would not be a problem. Theoretically, you're fulfilling the mitzvah. But if you're not willing to pay for it, then you're not yotzeh, then you're not fulfilling the obligation.
Correct.
That would be very similar to the other case that we said before about stealing the branches. But there is another case. The next case is, there is another case where you would steal and not fulfill the mitzvah. If Reuven built a sukkah on Shimon's property without Shimon giving you permission. So, and then Shimon goes and kicks you out of your sukkah that you built on his property, and he goes and sits in the sukkah. So you built a sukkah on his property. He kicks you out of the sukkah that you built. He uses it. So the law would be that is a stolen sukkah, and it doesn't fall into the other category where you kick someone out and you use their sukkah, you fulfill the mitzvah. Here, you don't fulfill it. And we don't say the rule of karka ain't an exelis, that property is not stolen, because here it's on the property, it's on your property. It's considered in the property of the robber. Normally, when we say property isn't stolen, we consider it in the possession of the person who was stolen from. But here, it's in your property because he stole your property. So in this scenario, we would fall under the category of stolen, and you would not fulfill your obligation. That would be another example. So getting back to the question of when do we say that you could use a sukkah without permission, so that would be if someone is not using his sukkah, and you go in there, he's not there, and you go in there and use the sukkah, then that would be a case that a person would want a mitzvah done with their possession, and you would be allowed to walk into his sukkah when he's not there, and because we are sure he wouldn't mind. Now, there is the only thing is the Mishnah Brura doesn't exactly agree with this. He adds a certain caveat, and that is that he says that if a person that you really should ask permission because he might come while you're there and he really doesn't want you to be there. And because he doesn't want you to be there, so you're really in his sukkah at a time that he doesn't really want you there. Now, there is another example that everyone mentions that it's not good. And that is if he's sitting there and he has an extra table and you just walk in and say, oh, I'm sitting here without getting permission. You just pop in there. So in such a scenario, so you're going in, and the term is that it's shalom midaitoi. So you don't have in mind to steal it. You just want to use his sukkah. So the law is, lechatchila, preferably you shouldn't go into a sukkah of your friend, even though you don't plan on stealing it, because maybe he doesn't want you watching him eat and watching him do his stuff there. So it sounds like he's there, and in that scenario, you should get permission. You can't say a bracha. L'chatchila, you have to get permission. But if he's not there, that's when you have this seemingly a debate between the Mishnah Berurah and the Alter Rebbe. If can you just walk in there, or is it better not to? Are we concerned that he might come while you're there, and he might be not interested in having you be there? And then in that scenario, it would only be you would not be allowed to make a bracha. Let me just pull up the Mishnah Berurah. He says, here that if it's possible that the owner is going to come while you're there, even though he wasn't there when you entered, you really shouldn't do this. You shouldn't go because he might be embarrassed to enter and eat or to do his stuff there. And that means that he really doesn't want you to be there. And so then it would be a problem for you to be reciting a bracha. So
a lot of this has to do with communities and people being in communication with one another, as with many other facts. Many people were prevented from building sukkahs because their landlords didn't want them to build them. It still happens here. And that
really gets into another issue, and that is what happens if you build a sukkah on property that you really shouldn't be building on. That's community property, or in the city square where
Rabbi,
you didn't get permission. Yes, one second. Actually, before I answer you, no, but Mordechai has his hand up. Yes,
that's
Mordechai.
what I was going to say. Mordechai has his hand up.
Yeah, I think there's a story in Sivan's book of Hasidic tales about that one year in a particular town that there was an esrog shortage, and like only one gevir was able to come up with an esrog, and in order for him to agree to share to it, he wanted something ridiculous like the Rebbe's share in Olam Haba, and the Rebbe agreed to it. But then the Rebbe instructed everybody in the town not to let
eat in their sukkah.
Eat in the sukkah until he reversed what he was trying to get.
Right. So that the question would be, what would have happened if he just went in against people's will? It's a good point Mordechai is making. Theoretically, that guy could have just forced his way into someone's sukkah. You couldn't say a bracha. You can't say a bracha in someone else's sukkah if you don't get permission. If they're there, But seemingly, if you went and you didn't actually steal his sukkah, because karka ain't an exelis, so you would have fulfilled the mitzvah of eating in a sukkah. So the question is, in that scenario, Rabbi Levi Yitzchok of Berdichev, who was the source of that whole story, he took into consideration that the person probably didn't know the halacha, because the guy could have probably forced his way in to someone's sukkah and said, I know I don't have permission, but I need to eat in a sukkah. Sorry, let me eat here. No, but the only problem was he probably didn't have food. So he didn't have food, so it didn't help, I guess. They weren't giving him food, so maybe it wouldn't have worked. It's a mitzvah to eat in the sukkah. He still needs food for that. So I guess that was what he relied on not having food. Yeah, yes.
The first case that you talked about, you said that an individual kicks out the owner of the sukkah.
Right.
And so therefore he fulfills the mitzvah.
Very surprising case, but yes. The point is,
even though this is a strong arm.
I need to
right.
let him eat one.
Right.
How can the rabbis justify this?
Right. So the thing is, you're not allowed to say a bracha in such a scenario. He couldn't say a bracha. The question is more according to the letter of the law. According to the letter of the law, would the person have fulfilled the mitzvah? And the reason why he could fulfill the mitzvah that way is because there's a rule in the laws and laws of property that karka eina nigzelas, that the ground can't be stolen. So what exactly did you steal? So in other words, you obviously transgress certain sins, you kicked out your friend, obviously it's not a normal thing to do. But according to the letter of the law, did you fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah? Kicking him out of his property, there's definitely some, issues with what you did. But did you fulfill the actual mitzvah of sukkah? Can we say that you stole the sukkah? Would this be considered a case of a stolen sukkah where you don't fulfill the mitzvah? That we can't say, because within the criteria of what it means to steal a sukkah, you didn't actually steal a sukkah. If you took a sukkah, brought it to your property, that would be stealing a sukkah. If you, in the other cases as well, you could steal wood and put it in your sukkah and then not be willing to pay money. That could be stealing a sukkah. But here, did you actually steal the sukkah? No. Did you cruelly kick someone out of his own sukkah? Yes, but you did. The fact is, you ate. You ate in a sukkah. So that's the explanation there. And you can't say a bracha leisha basukkah. Yes, Ben.
Yeah, I wanted to say by us in shul, people that build sukkot come to friends that don't have sukkot and tell them anytime you want to stop by and fulfill the obligation, you're welcome to do it.
Right, that's very nice. Yes. So it comes out that it's not so simple to steal a sukkah. In other words, there's a lot of ways. It's sort of like you have to figure out how it comes about that a person would fall into the category of stealing. But however you make it happen, there are cases where it's considered stealing, and that's what our Gemara tells us, that within the laws of sukkah, there's biblically a law that you cannot that you're not fulfilling the mitzvah by steal. If it really falls into the category of stealing, you don't fulfill the mitzvah. Okay, so that's basically the Gemara here. And I did mention yesterday about the machines. If machines are considered fulfilling making strings, and there's discussion about spinning the yarn. Everyone, spinning the yarn or the threads for tzitzis. Does that have to be lishma? We had a machlekes Rav and Shmuel, and even according to Rav, it could be that lechatchila, preferably you're supposed to. So in any event, there's discussion about the spinning machines, if that's considered lishma. Is that considered that you turn on the button, or is it not? And there were cases where it looked like they convinced some rabbanim to say that it's considered okay. Really, the machinery wasn't really considered okay. Anyway, so there's a lot of discussion about this lishma, doing it for the sake of the mitzvah, and that's one issue, one discussion here.
Is that like machine-made matzah versus hand matzah?
Yeah, similar to machine-made matzah, which has other issues with it as well. But one of the issues is, are you doing it for the mitzvah? And that had other issues as well. The fact that is the machinery able to be cleaned out, because there's so many little pieces of machinery there. And it's not just like washing your fingers, but there's so many, it's complicated to wash the machinery out. So does it really get cleaned out well in between each batch? And then there was another issue that they had, was that it's causing a lot of Jewish people to lose money, to lose their jobs by using these machines. That was another issue as well that was mentioned.
I was talking about, does the machine have kabbalah?
Yeah, no. So that is one of the issues I just mentioned. There's some other issues as well with that.